As we approached the gated entrance of the community, a sense of excitement filled the car. My family had heard whispers about the lavish houses and beautiful landscapes that characterized this upscale neighborhood. My father, a respected judge, had mentioned wanting to explore a potential investment property for our family, and visiting this locale felt like a step into a world of new possibilities. Expectations ran high as we cruised down the tree-lined road leading to the gate. The sun filtered through the lush canopy overhead, creating an inviting atmosphere that painted the perfect picture of suburban bliss. We imagined friendly neighbors greeting us with smiles and perhaps an invitation to join their community events. A sense of intrigue enveloped us. Would we find our new home here? However, upon arrival at the meticulously maintained entrance, reality struck. An imposing gate loomed ahead, manned by a stern-looking HOA employee who seemed more like a gatekeeper in a fairy tale than a welcoming host. As we approached, I noticed his posture stiffen, arms crossed as though guarding not just the entrance but an unspoken code of conduct. I felt a twinge of apprehension. My father stepped forward confidently, ready to present our case for entry. He offered a polite introduction, explaining that we were interested in exploring possible real estate opportunities within the community. Instead of the warmth we anticipated, however, we were met with an icy reception. The employee shook his head firmly, stating that visitors needed prior authorization to enter, a policy meant to uphold the neighborhood's exclusivity. The abrupt refusal left us momentarily speechless. My father attempted to reason with him, emphasizing his role as a judge and our genuine interest. Surely, he could see that we meant no harm? Yet, the employee remained unmoved, adhering strictly to regulations without even a hint of flexibility. It felt disheartening to be treated as intruders rather than potential future neighbors. As seconds turned into what felt like hours, I glanced back at my family. My mother wore an expression of disbelief, while my younger siblings shifted nervously in their seat. The contrast between our expectations and this cold encounter was stark. Instead of being welcomed into a vibrant community, we were on the outskirts, barred from engaging with it entirely. This moment would not only leave an imprint on our spirits, but also set into motion events that would soon spiral far beyond what any of us could have imagined. What began as simple curiosity about a neighborhood would ultimately lead to deeper conflicts over authority and power, a clash neither side had anticipated when the day began. As the car rolled to a stop at the gate, a palpable tension filled the air. We exchanged anxious glances, half hoping that the stern presence of the HOA employee might soften as we approached. My father took the lead, exuding confidence despite the uncertainty nagging at all of us. He straightened his jacket and smiled reassuringly at my mother and sibling. "Just stay calm, I'll handle this," he said, but the uncertainty in his tone contradicted his words. The employee stood behind a tall podium, clad in a crisp uniform that seemed to amplify his authoritative demeanor. His face was stoic, with a faint frown that hinted at unyielding resolve. As we approached, I couldn't help but feel like we were intruders in a realm where we didn't belong. The gentle rustling of leaves overhead felt like a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere radiating from the gate. "Good afternoon," my father began warmly, introducing our family and explaining our interest in potential real estate within the neighborhood. I watched closely, trying to gauge the employee's reaction. For a brief moment, it appeared as if the man might respond with at least a hint of warmth or curiosity, perhaps even an invitation to explore further. Instead, he merely shifted his weight and crossed his arms tighter across his chest, offering no more than a curt nod. "Sorry, but visitors need prior authorization to enter," he stated flatly, his voice devoid of any hint of empathy or camaraderie. "It's for security reasons." The words hung in the air like an impenetrable barrier, cold and unyielding. My father's brow furrowed, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind as he tried to navigate this unexpected obstacle. "I understand regulations are in place," he replied calmly. "But surely you can make an exception for a family interested in investing?" The hope in his voice was palpable. Yet, the employee's expression remained unmoved, almost as if he reveled in enforcing the rules with unwavering rigidity. With each refusal, I sensed frustration bubbling up inside my father, a man accustomed to authority and respect. "My name is Judge Sullivan," he asserted, attempting to leverage his position as a means of persuasion. Yet, instead of yielding, the employee straightened even further, making it clear that he would not bend to any personal appeals. In that moment, disappointment washed over my family like a chilly tide. I glanced at my mother, her countenance tinged with disbelief and confusion. My younger sibling sat silent, wide-eyed and caught between bewilderment and fear. What had started as an exciting adventure turned into a disheartening confrontation that revealed how arbitrarily power could shape our experiences. The severity of our situation became painfully clear. We were not just outsiders but unwelcome guests barred from engaging in this community, a profound disappointment that none of us had anticipated. As we turned back toward the car, the air felt heavier than before. This incident was only the beginning of what would evolve into a much larger conflict involving authority, community ethics, and personal rights. The mood in the car shifted as we pulled away from the imposing gate of the community, disappointment hanging in the air like a heavy fog. It was clear that our family had unique dynamics that informed how we approached this encounter and authority in general. My father, Judge Sullivan, was not just any parent. He was a figure of respect and gravitas in our town. With his blue robe often gracing the bench at the courthouse, he commanded respect from both colleagues and the community alike. Growing up in a household with a judge shaped my understanding of justice and authority. Conversations around the dinner table often revolved around legal principles, ethical dilemmas, and the importance of fairness. My father's career instilled in me a belief that authority should serve to protect and empower rather than oppress or exclude. Yet, as we faced the cold dismissal from the HOA employee, I could see a flicker of frustration in my father's eyes, a sentiment that contradicted his everyday experience of wielding power, an authority that could not be easily disregarded. In many ways, his position offered us a lens through which to view conflicts. We were accustomed to navigating systems where reason triumphed over rigidity. My mother often shared stories of his compassion during court proceedings, where he took time to understand each case before making decisions. However, here stood an employee who seemed entirely devoid of compassion, someone who adhered strictly to bureaucratic rules, turning our familial ideals into mere echoes against a stone wall. As my father tried to reason with the attendant at the gate, I sensed a deep-rooted struggle within him. He was well aware that many people experienced similar dismissals daily. He'd seen it play out in court cases involving disputes over property rights or neighborhood rules. Yet now it was happening to us, the very family who believed in advocating for fairness and understanding. The reality hit hard. This wasn't merely about entering a gated community. It was about confronting an unyielding authority that lacked empathy. While my younger sibling remained silent, absorbing everything with wide eyes, I felt compelled to support my father's unwavering stance against what seemed like an unreasonable barrier blocking our path. Each refusal from the employee chipped away at my father's usual confidence. Couldn't someone see that we were more than just visitors? This incident was only magnifying our family's complex relationship with authority figures. It forced us to confront not only external challenges but also internal questions about power dynamics and self-advocacy within structures meant to protect us. Or so we thought. As we drove away from the community, I began to wonder what actions my father might take next and how far he would go to challenge this unwarranted obstruction against us. His resolve would likely set off a chain reaction that would reverberate throughout our town, as we struggled not only for entry but also for dignity and respect. As the gravity of our experience at the gated community settled in, my mind began to shift toward the legal implications of what had just transpired. Homeowners associations, HOAs, wield significant power over their communities, often functioning as a bridge between homeowners and local governance. However, this authority comes with responsibilities that can be both complex and contentious. Essentially, HOAs are established to enforce certain rules and maintain common areas within a community. They create bylaws that residents agree to follow upon purchasing property in the area. These rules can cover anything from property appearance to behavioral expectations, allowing the HOA to maintain a harmonious living environment. Yet, this authority must also align with state laws regarding discrimination and access rights. When the HOA employee refused our entry based on a requirement for prior authorization, I couldn't help but question whether this was an appropriate exercise of their power. While it's not uncommon for HOAs to implement guest registration policies for security purposes, the refusal felt excessive and unjustified. The employee's stern demeanor suggested a rigidity that contradicted the spirit of community. After all, we had been seeking nothing more than an opportunity to explore potential investment in the neighborhood. Legally speaking, an HOA must ensure that its enforcement of rules does not infringe upon individuals' rights. This duty includes not only providing transparent governance but also acting within ethical and legal frameworks that prioritize residents' well-being. My father, with his extensive background in law, understood this nuance better than most. He recognized that while the HOA had established regulations intended for safety and order, they also had an obligation to treat individuals fairly. The question loomed: was the employee's refusal a legitimate act of enforcing community guidelines or an overreach that crossed ethical boundaries? If an HOA's actions contribute to alienating potential residents or applicants without just cause, they risk inviting scrutiny not only from individuals like us but also from higher authorities. In this instance, I felt a surge of indignation about how such an encounter could reflect systemic issues facing homeowners associations across our county. High-handedness and a lack of compassion could turn once welcoming communities into gated fortresses against newcomers or prospective buyers. In reflecting on my father's potential response, I wondered if he might consider challenging this behavior legally, not only as an affront to our family but also as a matter of principle for others who might suffer similar experiences. Could this situation escalate into a broader examination of how HOAs operate within the framework of local government? The implications seemed significant. What started as an unwelcome confrontation at a gate could eventually morph into essential discussions about governance and rights across communities, sparking conversations that would resonate far beyond our own disappointment. As we pulled away from the gate, I caught my father's reflection in the rearview mirror, his face a mix of disappointment and simmering frustration. The usually composed Judge Sullivan was not one to back down from a challenge, especially when it came to principles he held dear. The cold refusal by the HOA employee struck at the heart of his belief in fairness and justice, prompting him to reconsider not only our own experience, but also the broader implications of such authority over residents. Once we arrived home, my father wasted no time gathering his thoughts. He paced around the living room, running his hands through his hair as he contemplated the incident. "This isn't just about us being turned away," he said aloud, his voice firm yet tinged with disbelief. "It goes against everything we stand for as a community." The weight of his words hung in the air, resonating with all of us as we absorbed the enormity of what had just happened. After a few moments of silence, my father launched into a thoughtful analysis of our rights as potential residents. "An HOA has responsibilities just as much as it has rights," he explained to my mother and me. His legal expertise surfaced as he detailed how homeowners associations are bound to uphold fair treatment, while maintaining a sense of order. He expressed his disappointment that the employee had chosen to wield power instead of embracing community spirit. Feeling an urge to take action, he began pacing again, considering both legal avenues and public awareness strategies. "We need to make them accountable," he declared with a resolve that surprised even me. The thought of banning the entire HOA team from engaging with county matters was born not out of vengeance but from a desire to challenge what he perceived as an abuse of authority. His mind raced with possibilities. Could he draft legislation calling for oversight? Would other families join in solidarity against such arbitrary enforcement? Despite the anger simmering within him, I noticed an undertone of sadness in my father's demeanor. It was clear this encounter had left him questioning not only his role within the community, but also how others might suffer similar indignities without recourse. That realization seemed to weigh heavy. "We could seek support from others who have faced similar issues. Perhaps there's strength in numbers," he said thoughtfully. It was empowering to see him channeling his disappointment into something constructive, turning frustration into potential advocacy for change. As they discussed their options late into the evening, I realized that this incident could serve as a pivotal moment for our family, not merely a personal grievance but an opportunity to challenge systemic problems within homeowners associations. And as I listened to my father's passionate commitment to justice echo through our home, I couldn't help but feel pride mixed with hope. Perhaps we could foster change not just for ourselves but for future residents who would navigate similar hardships within communities meant to welcome them. In the days following our encounter at the gated community, my father became increasingly resolute about taking action against the HOA. The incident had not only frustrated him but stirred a deep sense of injustice that he could no longer ignore. This was about more than just our experience. It represented a broader issue regarding how authority figures could wield power without accountability. Judge Sullivan began by researching the legal framework governing homeowners associations within our county. He spent hours poring over statutes, case law, and existing complaints against various HOAs. His goal was to identify any precedents that might support his case for action. He believed that if the HOA could refuse entry without just cause, they were setting a dangerous precedent for other communities, one where arbitrary enforcement of rules could alienate potential residents and violate individual rights. As he gathered evidence, he also reached out to other families who had faced similar challenges with the HOA in question. The responses were eye-opening. Many shared their stories of exclusion and frustration, which only fueled my father's determination to act. In these conversations, he found both solidarity and motivation. It became clear to him that this issue transcended our family's initial grievance. It was an opportunity to advocate for fairness on behalf of others who felt powerless. With mounting evidence and support from affected residents, my father decided that a formal ban on the entire HOA team from engaging in county matters was not just necessary but justified. The rationale behind this decision was rooted in his belief that if an organization failed to uphold its responsibilities towards its residents, if it acted as a gatekeeper rather than a facilitator, then it should not be allowed to exercise further authority unchallenged. The process began with drafting a petition outlining the grievances against the HOA and detailing specific instances where their actions had crossed ethical boundaries. He meticulously articulated how their conduct violated principles of transparency and fairness expected from such organizations. My father believed that by holding them accountable in this manner, he could initiate crucial discussions about governance practices within all HOAs across our county. He organized a community meeting where residents could voice their concerns and sign the petition affirming their support for his proposed ban. The gathering quickly turned into a rallying point for change, with many expressing their shared frustrations and hopes for reform. Witnessing the collective resolve of his neighbors filled my father with renewed vigor. He realized they were no longer just an isolated family facing dismissal but part of a larger movement advocating for justice. As he prepared to present his petition to local government officials, I admired my father's unwavering commitment to confronting authority when it acted unjustly. The ban on the HOA team would serve as both a personal statement against their behavior and a broader assertion of residents' rights within communities meant to foster inclusivity rather than exclusion. It was clear that what began as a simple visit gone wrong had evolved into something much greater, a battle for dignity, respect, and ethical governance in our neighborhood's future. As Judge Sullivan's petition circulated through the community, reactions from residents began to emerge, illustrating a complex tapestry of opinions regarding both the HOA's practices and his proposed ban. At first glance, it became apparent that the response was far from one-dimensional. Emotions ran high as both supporters and opponents rallied around the issue, each group driven by their own experiences and perspectives. Many residents were encouraged by my father's decisive action, viewing him as a champion of rights for those who had long felt silenced by the HOA's strict enforcement policies. During community meetings, supporters expressed gratitude for his willingness to confront what they perceived as an oppressive gatekeeping mechanism. Stories poured in from neighbors who had similarly faced rejection or complications with the HOA. The retired couple next door shared their frustrations over receiving fines for what they felt were minor infractions, while a young family described harrowing experiences being denied access to amenities due to arbitrary rule enforcement. The rallying cries for change grew louder, echoing through our neighborhood spaces. However, not everyone was in favor of my father's stance. A vocal faction of residents defended the HOA, arguing that its rules were necessary for maintaining property values and ensuring safety within the community. They believed that a certain level of control was essential to protect against irresponsible behavior that could detract from the collective image of the neighborhood. This group raised concerns about potential chaos if oversight was removed and warned against what they saw as my father's reckless determination to dismantle well-established systems. They argued passionately at community gatherings, noting how rules had contributed significantly to their sense of order and belonging. Amidst this division, I could sense a palpable tension in our once harmonious neighborhood. Discussions grew heated at times, as debates on individual rights clashed with ideals of collective responsibility. Some residents felt torn between respecting the traditions upheld by the HOA and supporting a more inclusive environment that acknowledged individual grievances. While some neighbors rallied around my father's cause with applause and encouragement, others engaged in hushed conversations criticizing his methods. The local news even began to pick up on this unfolding drama, framing it as a significant conflict between authority and individual rights with broader implications beyond our community. Articles began discussing homeowners associations in general terms, shining a light on governance practices throughout suburban America. Opinions from legal experts made appearances, along with testimonies from community leaders who warned of complications arising from abolishing established systems. Through it all, my father remained steadfast in his principles. He sought opportunities to engage both sides in open discussions during town hall meetings, attempting to bridge gaps rather than deepen divides. He implemented forums where residents could voice their opinions freely without hostility, hoping these initiatives would lead to more productive solutions rather than continuous contention. The landscape of our neighborhood had transformed dramatically in those weeks. We were no longer just residents inhabiting homes but active participants in crucial dialogues impacting our future as a community, a journey that inspired many but also challenged long-standing beliefs about authority and governance within suburban paradigms. We were witnessing the growing pains of a community at odds with itself but striving towards a common goal: fairness and mutual respect for all its members. The incident involving Judge Sullivan and the HOA had far-reaching implications for homeowners associations beyond just our community. It prompted a reevaluation of how these entities operate and govern. As discussions surrounding the case gained traction, they began to coalesce into broader conversations about the role of HOAs in American suburban life and the balance of power between residents and governing bodies. At the core of this movement was a growing awareness that many people felt marginalized by the stringent rules often enforced by HOAs. The incident illuminated a pattern of behavior where authority figures within these organizations could easily dismiss residents' needs or concerns, leading to alienation. As more stories surfaced from communities across the county, and even the state, people began to realize that Judge Sullivan's experience was not isolated. Rather, it reflected a concerning trend in which residents often felt powerless against their own governance structures. As local news outlets picked up on the story, articles dissected what it meant for HOAs to hold so much control over community life, while simultaneously lacking accountability to those they serve. Discussions around governance practices gained momentum, with legal experts weighing in on how HOAs operated within existing laws. The conversations pivoted towards calls for reform, pushing for clearer oversight mechanisms that would require HOAs to be more transparent in their operations and decision-making processes. Moreover, communities began to rally around ideas for creating independent oversight committees or even revising bylaws to include protections against arbitrary enforcement practices. These proposals aimed to empower residents by ensuring they had avenues through which they could voice concerns without fear of retribution. As public sentiment evolved, it became evident that many residents were no longer content with passive acceptance of HOA rules. They wanted active participation in shaping their community's governance. This shift in perception was critical because it began to challenge the long-held belief that HOAs solely served as guardians of property values and neighborhood aesthetics. The narrative started to change from one of strict adherence to regulations toward fostering inclusive environments where diverse voices could be heard and considered. In this way, Judge Sullivan's confrontation became a catalyst for increased activism among homeowners who demanded greater agency and representation in their living spaces. In addition, the conflict resonated on social media platforms, where residents shared their experiences with various HOAs and exchanged strategies for advocating for change. Online forums buzzed with ideas about forming coalitions across different neighborhoods united by similar grievances, thereby amplifying their voices collectively. This digital mobilization played a significant role in sustaining momentum behind calls for reform and accountability, making it harder for decision-makers to ignore. Ultimately, as my father led efforts toward accountability within our community, he inadvertently sparked a larger movement advocating for fairness in homeowners associations across the region. His actions influenced not only perceptions of authority but also initiated a reevaluation of what it meant to be part of a community governed by rules, challenging everyone involved to reflect on collective responsibility towards inclusivity, transparency, and mutual respect within suburban landscapes. In doing so, he hoped not only to change his own neighborhood but also inspire a wave of reform that could ripple throughout other communities grappling with similar issues. In the wake of our family's tumultuous encounter with the HOA, reflections on authority and conflict resolution began to emerge among us, each member processing the experience in their own way. My father, as a judge, approached the situation with a blend of legal acumen and personal conviction. He often emphasized the importance of justice and fairness, sharing insights about how authority should be exercised responsibly and ethically. For him, this incident underscored a critical lesson, that authority figures must be held accountable for their actions, especially when those actions impact the lives and rights of others. My mother, on the other hand, reflected more on the emotional aspect of authority. "It's disheartening to feel so powerless," she lamented during one of our family discussions. "We expect people in positions of power to act with kindness and understanding, yet here we were, treated like intruders." Her perspective highlighted a fundamental truth: authority does not only wield power, it also carries the responsibility of empathy. She expressed a desire for future interactions with authority figures to be characterized by mutual respect rather than rigid enforcement of rules. My younger sibling, observing the conflict unfold, began to grapple with their own understanding of authority. Initially, they held a more black and white view of right and wrong, but witnessing my father's advocacy for change sparked questions about ethics and morality. "Why do people follow rules that seem unfair?" they asked one evening, seeking clarity. This prompted a deeper conversation about the complexities of governance and how societal norms can sometimes perpetuate injustice. It was a pivotal moment for them, as they began to understand that moral courage is essential in confronting authority when it acts unjustly. As we shared our thoughts, it became clear that this experience had collectively reshaped our views on conflict resolution. We recognized that resolving conflicts is not merely about winning or losing. It requires dialogue, understanding, and a willingness to listen to opposing viewpoints. My father's approach to addressing the HOA highlighted the importance of engaging with authority constructively rather than resorting to hostility or rebellion. In many ways, our family discussions echoed the sentiments being expressed within the community at large. Just as my father sought to challenge the HOA's practices through legal avenues and community engagement, we too realized that we could advocate for change in our own small ways, whether through meaningful conversations with neighbors or participating in community forums. Ultimately, this incident taught us all valuable lessons about authority's duality, its potential for both good and harm. It served as a reminder that while authority figures hold power, those subjected to such power also possess voices that deserve to be heard. Together, we began to see that confronting unjust authority is not just an obligation but an opportunity for growth, both personally and within our community. As we moved forward from this experience, we felt empowered to challenge unfairness while promoting understanding and cooperation among all members of our neighborhood. Reflecting on the events that unfolded surrounding our family's encounter with the HOA, it's clear that several key takeaways emerged from this experience, shaping our understanding of power dynamics, community involvement, and personal agency. First and foremost, the incident served as a powerful reminder of the inherent challenges individuals face when confronting institutional authority. While authority figures are expected to act in the best interest of their constituents, there are instances where power can become oppressive rather than protective. From Judge Sullivan's advocacy for accountability to my mother's emphasis on empathy and authority, Our family discussions illuminated the necessity for checks and balances within any governing body. The dynamic between residents and homeowners associations illustrates how vital it is for communities to demand transparency and fairness from those in power. This experience highlighted that power should be wielded with responsibility and moral integrity, fostering environments where all members feel valued and heard. Moreover, the journey underscored the importance of active community involvement. As conversations evolved among neighbors, it became evident that many residents shared similar frustrations with their HOAs, creating an opportunity for collective action. The willingness of individuals to band together not only amplified voices but also instigated discussions about reforming governance structures in order to prioritize inclusivity. Our family's ordeal sparked a movement that inspired others to challenge unjust practices rather than passively accept them. In addition to community solidarity, this experience emphasized personal agency and conflict resolution. Each family member grew in their ability to navigate difficult situations with courage and conviction. We learned that advocating for change often requires an amalgamation of civil discourse and strategic engagement, recognizing when to challenge authority directly while also fostering respectful dialogue aimed at building bridges between differing viewpoints. One particularly poignant lesson was understanding that confronting authority is not merely about expressing dissent. It is also an opportunity to foster constructive conversations regarding governance and collaboration. The complexities surrounding HOA policies opened our eyes to the broader implications for community governance, reminding us that these issues extend beyond our own neighborhood and resonate throughout society. As we move forward from this incident, we carry with us a renewed commitment to challenge injustices wherever they arise while promoting responsible leadership within community structures. The lessons learned are invaluable. They remind us that power belongs not just to those who hold positions of authority but also to those who dare to question it, that community involvement can affect meaningful change, and that personal agency plays a crucial role in shaping our collective future. Ultimately, this experience has transformed not just how we view authority, but how we participate in our communities moving forward. It has equipped us with insights that will guide us as we advocate not just for ourselves but for others who might feel marginalized by systemic inequalities within institutions intended to serve them. In doing so, we hope to contribute positively to a culture of engagement built on respect, inclusivity, and shared responsibility.